Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. The Grand Heaven Master looked away from Bai Xiaochun and coolly said, "We'll discuss your request in a moment." When the bearded man heard that, he held his tongue and looked over at Chen Haosong. Heaven Master Hall was very quiet. At this point, Bai Xiaochun looked up, took a deep breath, and prepared to speak. However, the Grand Heaven Master didn't let him. Looking over at Chen Haosong, he said, "Heavenly Duke Chen, did you also come to speak about the Great Wall?" Chen Haosong's expression was the same as ever as he took a few steps forward, clasped hands and bowed. "Grand Heaven Master, the situation at the Great Wall is urgent. The slightest unexpected circumstance there would have grave ramifications in the wildlands. I also believe that we should beef up the defenses. We need to send more soul cultivators and more necromancers to hold the line. However, an effort like that would require much soul medicine and other resources. Grand Heaven Master, would you please consider granting permission for this? Furthermore, I would also be willing to go to the front lines to supervise the war effort." With that, he clasped hands and bowed again. Considering that two heavenly dukes were essentially offering the same advice, even the Grand Heaven Master would need to take it seriously. "How much in terms of resources?" Without the slightest hesitation, Chen Haosong said, 8 billion portions of soul medicine, as well as roughly 1 billion other items necessary for routine cultivation and spell formation construction. With those resources, I am confident in being able to prevent the Heavenspan River cultivators from taking even a single step into the wildlands. No expression could be seen on the face of the Grand Heaven Master, although he happened to be tapping the arm of his throne with his index finger. Inwardly, he was feeling very angry. The amount of resources being requested to shore up the defensive lines was much more than usual. And yet, there was little the Grand Heaven Master could do about that. Even though much of the aristocracy was loyal to him, everyone had their own personal ambitions, and wanted to further the glory and honor of their clan. That was why war efforts always involved significant expenditure, and also one reason that the Grand Heaven Master couldn't outright forbid the clans from accumulating wealth. Again, Heaven Master Hall fell into silence. Nobody spoke. Even Bai Xiaochun could tell what the Grand Heaven Master was thinking, that the resources being requested were vast. On any other occasion, he would have been shocked to hear such numbers, but right now, he was so worried about Bai Hao that he didn't have time to think about the matter. Furthermore, every moment that ticked by meant more danger for his apprentice. However, he could also tell that, to the Grand Heaven Master, the matters at hand were more important than requests from himself. He couldn't just interrupt. In fact, doing so would most likely make things worse. He could only hope that the current discussion would be wrapped up as quickly as possible, after which he could ask for the Grand Heaven Master's help. Countless thoughts ran through Bai Xiaochun's mind, and because of his worry and anxiety, he didn't even notice that the Grand Heaven Master had turned to look at him. The Grand Heaven Master could tell that Bai Xiaochun was very anxious, and that he clearly had some important matter he wished to discuss. At this point, his eyes glittered, and an expression of displeasure appeared on his face. "From the moment you arrived, Bai Hao, it was clear that you had some urgent matter on your mind. Could it be that the inspection's manner has come up with some important new evidence?" Shaken, Chen Haosong and everyone else in the room looked over at Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun could hardly breathe as he stood there and looked back at the Grand Heaven Master. The clear displeasure in the Grand Heaven Master's gaze shattered any notions within Bai Xiaochun that the man wasn't interested in discarding him. Heart-trembling, he decided that since things were bad, he would just have to hope to get lucky. "Grand Heaven Master, this matter doesn't have to do with the inspection's manner. Your humble Sir." Before he could say anything further, the Grand Heaven Master waved his hand to interrupt. "Since it's not an inspection's manner matter, then keep it to yourself." His words struck Bai Xiaochun like lightning, causing his mind to reel. What little bit of hope had existed in his heart was washed away with bitterness. Although he had long since come to suspect that the Grand Heaven Master's attitude had changed, to have that suspicion confirmed still caused him to shiver inwardly. "If you want to get rid of me, fine, but you don't have to be so obvious about it." At this point, it was clear that he wouldn't be getting any help from the Grand Heaven Master in the matter of Bai Hao's disappearance. As for the two heavenly dukes present, their eyes flickered in response to the Grand Heaven Master's words, and Chen Haosong even smiled coldly. From what he could tell, the Grand Heaven Master was sending a clear message here that his previous tool was about to be discarded. Various expressions could be seen on the faces of the 6 heavenly marquises, and all of them were chuckling coldly in their hearts. From what they could tell, it was obvious that this Bao Hao was about to be discarded, which would be cause of rejoicing for all of the nobility and aristocracy. They were all very familiar with the Grand Heaven Master, and knew that Bai Xiaochun was now like a rowboat in a stormy sea, who could capsize and sink at any moment. What was occurring right now only provided more evidence of that very fact. Bai Hao's days are definitely numbered. It seems he will suffer a much different fate than the last inspections commissioner, He Ming. Let's see if he knows his place. If he's smart, he'll simply resign, and hope that the Grand Heaven Master gives him a chance to live. If he continues to serve as the inspections commissioner, then he'll definitely end up dead. HMPH. Even if he does resign, the Grand Heaven Master won't just let him go. He's offended too many people. Everybody wants him dead. Without the inspections commissioner title to protect him, he'll be killed beyond the shadow of a doubt. Everyone in the hall was thinking something different, but all of them were looking at the situation with coldness. Although Bai Xiaochun couldn't see it in their eyes, he knew their general attitude. He was having trouble breathing smoothly, and his eyes were completely bloodshot. Anxiety and worry regarding Bai Hao had completely consumed him. It was only made worse by thoughts of what would happen if his identity were revealed. And then there was the sudden change in the Grand Heaven Master's stance. Furthermore, it seemed obvious that news of what had just happened would rapidly spread through Archemperor City. Soon, all of the nobility and aristocracy would know. Before long, their fear of him would diminish, and they would begin to test and challenge him. It wouldn't take long before he would have no way to make it out of the situation alive. By now, it was obvious why people had felt confident enough to make a move on Bai Hao. Obviously, they had guessed that the Grand Heaven Master planned to get rid of his inspections commissioner. If he didn't do something about the situation, then when the people who had taken Bai Hao learned of it, whatever fear they still felt would vanish. Bai Hao's situation would be more hopeless than ever, and Bai Xiaochun would be in extreme danger. If he wanted to save Bai Hao, he had to stabilize his position. He needed even more power than before. Only then could he strike fear into the hearts of Bai Hao's captors, and at the same time, use his newfound power to get the clues he needed. Everything revolved around the Grand Heaven Master. No matter how he did it, he had to convince the Grand Heaven Master not to get rid of him. And more than that, he needed to make himself more important. Only then would he have a chance. You people are forcing me to do this, he thought, gritting his teeth as he stood there trembling. At this point, he had to throw caution to the wind. He had to flip the table over. It was now time to follow the plan Bai Hao himself had come up with when Bai Xiaochun had first been appointed to be the inspections commissioner. Bai Hao had come up with the plan based on speculations regarding what the Grand Heaven Master would eventually do. Now, the Grand Heaven Master was doing just that. In the past, Bai Xiaochun had felt the plan to be too ruthless. After all, whatever killing intent the nobility and aristocracy felt toward him right now was only temporary, and would likely fade as the years went by. But if he went through with Bai Hao's plan, then the nobles and aristocrats would hate him for the rest of their lives. It would be a hatred that seeped down into their bones, and even their souls. That was why he had always hesitated to go through with it. But right now, he needed to be more important to the Grand Heaven Master than ever. And he had to find Bai Hao. And since he couldn't do it by himself, he needed the help of a benefactor. The Grand Heaven Master. Furthermore, he needed the help of numerous people throughout the Archemperor dynasty, people who would act as his agents among all of the various clans. He needed to know about everything that happened in all of the clans. Only then could his investigation produce the results he needed, and reveal the party who had captured Bai Hao. Having reached this point in his train of thought, he took a deep breath. Eyes bloodshot, he took a step forward in the direction of the Grand Heaven Master. Clasping hands and bowing deeply, he spoke in the coldest, most sinister of voices. Grand Heaven Master, your humble servant came here today because I have a plan. A plan to solve all of your problems. In response to Bai Xiaochun's words, all eyes in Heaven Master Hall shifted to focus on him. The 6 heavenly marquises were clearly taken by surprise, and all of a sudden, they realized that Bai Xiaochun was the epitome of ruthlessness. Maybe he was a toothless tiger, but even still, he left them feeling very unsettled. Chen Haosong and the beautifully bearded Heavenly Duke were visibly displeased, and their hearts were beginning to pound. The Grand Heaven Master looked over at Bai Xiaochun. When it came to his plan to cast him aside, it wasn't the cause of even an iota of guilt within him. As far as he was concerned, everyone in heaven and earth was a pawn to be used at his leisure, and could be classified into only 2 types: useful and not useful. Before, this Bai Hao had been a useful tool. Now, he was not very useful. Of course, he hadn't planned to kill him. Furthermore, the fact that he wasn't useful at the moment didn't outweigh the fact that he was important to both the Hell Emperor and the Giant Ghost King. As such, he knew that he could potentially be made useful again later. Furthermore, the words he had just spoken immediately sparked the Grand Heaven Master's interest. After all, he had not forgotten that Bai Xiaochun was the one who came up with the plan carried out during the ancestral sacrifices. Grand Heaven Master, Bai Xiaochun continued in a near growl, your humble servant's plan is the type which should not be made privy to too many people who are not part of it. Smiling, the Grand Heaven Master waved his hand, and before the 6 heavenly marquises could react, they began to fade away, and were soon gone, removed to a location outside the imperial palace. Unsightly expressions could be seen on their faces as they exchanged glances and then snorted coldly. He's bluffing, that's all it is. It seems this Bai Hao just won't give up. HMPH, struggling all the way into the grave. Well, the more he does that, the worse off he'll be. Meanwhile, back in Heaven Master Hall, the Grand Heaven Master's expression was exactly the same as before as he said, go ahead. Other than he and Bai Xiaochun, the only people present were Chen Haosong and the bearded Heavenly Duke, who stood there motionless as they looked at Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun's eyes glittered as he looked over at the 2 Heavenly Dukes. As of this moment, he knew for sure that these 2 were trusted confidants of the Grand Heaven Master. Who would have thought that Chen Haosong is actually a close advisor to the Grand Heaven Master? His brow furrowed slightly as he thought back to everything he knew about Chen Haosong. Something about the whole situation seemed off, but there wasn't time to ponder the situation right now. Sighing softly, he looked at the Grand Heaven Master and continued, your humble servant disagrees with Heavenly Duke Chen about what should be the priority right now. Immediately, the Grand Heaven Master's eyes flickered, and the gazes of the 2 Heavenly Dukes turned sharper than ever. According to the traditions of the dynasty, there are 108 Heavenly Marquises, 10 Heavenly Dukes, and 4 Heavenly Kings. They are hereditary positions held in perpetuity, meaning that if a Heavenly Marquis dies, then as long as his clan isn't exterminated, or some other drastic situations arise, then there is virtually no chance of someone outside of that clan taking on his mantle. Furthermore, only a direct descendant of the previous Heavenly Marquis can succeed him. Bai Xiaochun spoke in an icy cold voice, and his eyes were both bloodshot and ruthless looking. At the moment, he had decided to throw caution to the wind. Because he had no suspects in the disappearance of Bai Hao, he currently had to be suspicious of everyone. Even if there are no suitable successors because of cultivation-based issues, the position will still remain with that bloodline, and they will simply wait for an appropriate person to rise up. That is why all Heavenly Marquises select their successors long in advance, and only from the direct bloodline of their clan. Special attention is given to that person in their cultivation, so that they can be groomed to be the perfect successor. That is how the arrangement works for Heavenly Marquises, and it's the same with the Heavenly Dukes and Heavenly Kings. Bai Xiaochun spoke with decisiveness that could sever nails and chop iron, and the Grand Heaven Master listened with rapt attention. Clearly, he was very interested to hear what was to be said next. Chen Haosong and the bearded Heavenly Duke were frowning, and were clearly completely in the dark about what Bai Xiaochun was getting at. Flicking his sleeve, Bai Xiaochun raised his voice and continued speaking at a breakneck speed. Because of this tradition, there are a bit more than 100 clans who have an eternal place within the dynasty. Furthermore, they only grow more powerful as time passes, and accumulate staggering amounts of wealth. That wealth is the true source of their power, and their confidence. It is the foundation of everything. As long as everything goes their way, things are smooth. But with the right spark, they could erupt into violence with the resources of a whole nation at their disposal. In fact, if drastic upheavals ever struck the Arch-Emperor dynasty, and more than 100 such clans joined forces, their profound resources would make them far too powerful. At this point, Chen Haosong realized what was going on. Eyes cold, he said, shut your mouth, Bai Hao. This is complete and utter hogwash. Perhaps the Heavenly Kings are exceptions, but the Heavenly Marquises and Heavenly Dukes run huge clans. They have to take care of every clan member, and make sure they have sufficient battle prowess, not for themselves, and not to rise up as independent forces, but as the reserve power of the Arch-Emperor dynasty. In fact, you have simply no idea how expensive it is to take care of a clan and increase its battle prowess. And that's all to maintain the reserve powers of the dynasty. As far as he was concerned, what Bai Xiaochun was currently saying was very dangerous. I don't know, Bai Xiaochun said, looking over at him. Although Bai Xiaochun generally feared death, and was usually a coward, he knew that now was not the time to fall back on such tendencies. I think there are probably few people in the Arch-Emperor dynasty who know more than I do about such things. How many clans have you shaken down, Heavenly Duke Chen? And how many have I? Do you know how much wealth I saw in each of those shakedowns? How much reserve savings? Well, let me tell you. In fact, I'll spell it out very, very clearly. I've shaken down 18 Heavenly Marquee clans. And you know what? Every single one of those clans had amassed wealth that could only be described as sufficient to shake heaven and earth. The Li clan had saved up 1 billion portions of soul medicine, 279 soul grounds, and 1,000 inactive large-scale spell formations. And how about the Chen clan? 2 billion portions of soul medicine. That alone could fund 30% of the military expenditures you just referred to, Heavenly Duke Chen. Can you imagine how many cultivators it would take to use up that many resources? In the third wave of shakedowns, the clan of Heavenly Marquee Gongsun Dao turned out to have hundreds of thousands of sets of materials to create spell formations. Plus, they had 10 million soul bombs. If those bombs detonated, they could destroy most of Arch-Emperor City. If the Heavenly Marquee clans are like that, then what do you think the Heavenly Dukes are like? In this matter, I will not be shutting my mouth. You will. By the time he finished speaking, he was yelling. Chen Haosong's chest heaved as he glared angrily at him, and yet, he was incapable of offering a retort. As for the Grand Heaven Master, he simply sat there quietly, looking at Bai Xiaochun with shining eyes. The one to speak next was the bearded Heavenly Duke. Even if the Heavenly Marquee clans have deep reserve savings and power, Bai Hao, that only goes to show how strong the Arch-Emperor dynasty is. One of the main reasons the Celestial can't invade us easily is because of how intrepid and valiant we are. The resources we have help us groom our successors, and pass on their strength from generation to generation. They protect the glory of the Arch-Emperor dynasty, and also ensure that there are only 108 Heavenly Marquises. In fact, that is also why the number of Heavenly Dukes and Kings is limited. When you have a sharp blade, you keep it that way, you don't grind it down until it's dull. Bai Xiaochun waved his hand dismissively at the two Heavenly Dukes. Focusing on the Grand Heaven Master, he said, "Wrong. I believe that the most important principle in the world is fairness. Fairness is the only way to ensure the continued growth of the dynasty. That is the only way to guarantee that a dynasty can stand strong and tall. Why do these clans only view their certain heirs as important? Why do those heirs get all the resources? Why are other children of the clan so vastly unimportant? It's not fair to the other children, and it's especially unfair to the bastards. Why is only a designated successor allowed to take over for a dead Heavenly Marquee, and thus control the wealth of the clan? It's simply not fair to both the other members of the direct bloodline and the bastard children. Therefore, I suggest that the wealth of the clans that make up the aristocracy be equally distributed. Give that wealth to all heirs, regardless of their status in the bloodline, and regardless of whether or not they are bastards. Everyone should have the chance to become a successor, and everyone should have an equal share of the resources. Heavenly Marquises, Heavenly Dukes, Heavenly Kings, their wealth and resources should be equally divided among all their children. That would be a gift to the people, and grace to the commoners. Only in that way can the Arch-Emperor dynasty grow stronger than ever. I hope that in the future, we won't just have 108 Heavenly Marquises. I hope that we will have many more, and more Heavenly Dukes too. At the same time, everyone will proclaim the glory of the Grand Heaven Master, thank him eternally, and offer oaths of unending loyalty." As his voice echoed out with thunderous volume in Heaven Master Hall, Bai Xiaochun flicked his sleeve to add emphasis to his words. This was a truly vicious plan. It was a vicious plan through and through. In fact, it was vicious to a completely shocking degree, to a level that would leave many people bristling with anger. Chen Haosong felt like his heart was being struck by hundreds of thousands of lightning bolts. Face falling, he actually staggered slightly as he stood there. "Grand Heaven Master, you mustn't do such a thing," he said, trembling. He had many heirs, and if this plan were carried out, it could shatter his entire clan. Furthermore, nobody would be able to revolt against the Grand Heaven Master because of it. After all, he wouldn't be the one to take away the resources. The chaos which would result in each and every clan would force them all to do everything in their power just to remain stable. In the end, it would essentially take all the biggest clans and reduce them to dozens of smaller clans. With no clans able to maintain a dominant position, it would be hard to even state what the political situation would be in the years to come. Chen Haosong didn't even dare to think about it. This Bai Hao is completely ruthless, he cursed inwardly. Why won't he just go and die already? This vicious plan was clearly an extenuation of the shakedowns. However, the ones to be shaking down the clans wouldn't be Bai Xiaochun, it would be the children in the clans, and those people in the clan who were loyal to them. Bai Xiaochun was asking to hand a sharp blade to the bastard sons and the members of the direct bloodlines who had no right of succession. Then he would have them raise that blade up over the heads of the clan as a whole. It was a very crafty plan. It would sow chaos within all of the nobility and aristocracy by turning the clans on themselves internally. The people who currently held power would be badly burned, and no one else. After all of the children were members of the direct bloodline, and carried the requisite blood of the clan. Short of exterminating all descendants, any given marquis, duke, or king would be incapable of smoothly resolving all of the resulting conflicts. Contrariwise, it would be a boon to the bastard sons and other children with no right of succession. Although such people normally did get access to better cultivation resources than the average cultivator, it was nothing compared to the true successors. For the most part, they only slightly benefited from the vast wealth of their clans. But if this plan were to be carried out, everything would change. Everyone would have equal access to the wealth, successors, non-successors, and bastards alike. How could people like Chen Haosong not go mad? How could they not be passionately opposed to it? Of course, unluckiest of all were the current appointed successors. They would be suffering catastrophic blows, and their futures would essentially be ruined. One could only imagine how much they would hate Bai Xiaochun. Whatever hatred they already felt would increase exponentially, and would permeate their very marrow. As for the people currently in power, they would be skating on even thinner ice. All of the wealth they had worked so hard to build up, all of their savings, would be divided up in the clan. It would make it impossible for them to say if they could continue to bask in their previous glory. On top of that, such people would then be forced to watch helplessly as their chosen successor squabbled and fought with the other children. Their hatred for Bai Xiaochun would reach towering heights, to the point where they would desire nothing more than to drink his blood, dine on his flesh, and crush his bones to bits. Before, Bai Xiaochun had been a dangerous knife that could be directed at anyone, which was why everyone had wanted him dead. But now, that knife was threatening everyone. This is complete insanity, the bearded heavenly duke said, chills running up and down his spine. Although he was loyal to the Grand Heaven Master, the mere thought of how terrifying this plan was left him in utter terror of Bai Xiaochun. Scalp tingling in fear, he clasped hands toward the Grand Heaven Master and bowed deeply. Grand Heaven Master, you mustn't do such a thing. As for the Grand Heaven Master, he sat there in his throne, breathing unsteadily, which was a rare thing. As he looked at Bai Xiaochun, his eyes shone with brilliant light. Never could he have anticipated that Bai Xiaochun would come up with a plan like this. From beginning to end, he had explained everything in perfect detail. As far as the Grand Heaven Master was concerned, there was no downside. And the upsides virtually defied description. It was a plot that was tailor-made for him. Although it wouldn't necessarily resolve the issues of the military expenditures, it would solve the crux of the issue. The greed of the nobility and aristocracy would be ended. Furthermore, any profits they made in the future would be evenly distributed, which would lead to the overall strengthening of the Arch-Emperor dynasty as a whole. Plus, everyone who benefited from the new arrangement would be deeply loyal to the Grand Heaven Master, who would be the source of everything they had gained. At the same time, it would prevent any one clan from becoming so powerful that they could eventually threaten his position. The Grand Heaven Master's eyes were shining brightly. Before, the only use he had found in Bai Xiaochun was how he caused a big scene, striking fear into the aristocracy, and forcing the Arch-Emperor to go into secluded meditation. He had also pushed the Grand Heaven Master to the peak of his current power. But now, he thought back to all of the wealth Bai Xiaochun had sent to him during the clan shakedowns, and immediately understood the main point of the argument. And then, the gears in his head started to turn. Now that he thought about it, the reserve savings of these clans really were inappropriately large. He also understood that the very extreme circumstances in which he had exterminated 18 heavenly marquises recently were very unique. At any other time, they would likely have led to a rebellion. Furthermore, taking out 18 heavenly marquises was the limit of what he was capable of. If he continued on with such action, it would lead to complete revolt. That was another reason why he had been contemplating expelling Bai Xiaochun, to sat the anger of the masses. But the plan which had just been presented was flawless. He didn't have to take any risks, and would come out victorious without ever having to fight. He could dismantle the aristocracy with almost no effort. If the plan were carried out, not only would people be unable to use it as an excuse to revolt, but most people would be delighted by it. Just as Bai Xiaochun had said, their profound gratitude would be given to the person who had given them the biggest chance of their lifetimes, the Grand Heaven Master. Supporting him would be the same as safeguarding themselves. As for the possibility of some unknown factors coming into play, the Grand Heaven Master was confident in being able to handle them. With such thoughts on his mind, the Grand Heaven Master looked at Bai Xiaochun, his eyes shining with praise. As of this moment, he realized that his previous plan of getting rid of Bai Xiaochun didn't make much sense. He was a rare genius. He could cut down the enemy, handle important matters, and put good plans and ideas forward. His heart was beginning to pound, and soon, he simply couldn't cover up his pleasure. He began to laugh uproariously, a laughter which filled the two heavenly dukes with incredible terror. Grand Heaven Master, you mustn't do such a thing. Please reconsider, Grand Heaven Master. Bai Xiaochun completely ignored the two heavenly dukes, and focused completely on the Grand Heaven Master. And when he saw the praise in the man's eyes, and heard his laughter, he breathed a sigh of relief. He also knew that not only had he resolved a major crisis, he had also pushed himself to new heights of power. And yet, he felt no joy. His heart was still as cold as ice, and his murderous aura continued to grow stronger. Just hold on a little bit longer, Howard. Laughing, the Grand Heaven Master ignored the two heavenly dukes and turned to Bai Xiaochun. A blessing for all living creatures. Divine kindness from above. From the mortals to the nobles, Wildlander clans will no longer be divided by age or bloodline. All wealth will be evenly distributed. Call it a proclamation of universal grace. This is a wonderful thing for the Arch-Emperor dynasty. In fact, I will support the new arrangement myself. Let it begin in Heaven Master manner and spread to fill the entire dynasty. Heavenly Marquises, Heavenly Dukes, Heavenly Kings, all will comply. Continuing to laugh heartily, the Grand Heaven Master rose excitedly from his throne. Bai Hao, hear my command, he said, waving his hand dramatically. Your humble servant awaits his orders. Bai Xiaochun said decisively. Henceforth, you will command 5,000 troops in your role as Inspections Commissioner. You will also be responsible for enforcing the proclamation of universal grace. Take your leave and get to work. With that, he flicked his sleeve, causing Bai Xiaochun and Chen Haosong to fade away from Heaven Master Hall. Only the bearded Heavenly Duke remained behind, frowning and sighing bitterly. He knew that there was no way to change what was happening, and that the plan was actually perfectly suited for the Grand Heaven Master. Taking a few steps forward, he clasped hands and bowed. Grand Heaven Master, you can't leave that kid alive. He's truly venomous, a clan-reviling brute. First was the matter with the ancestral sacrifices, and now this. The nobility and aristocracy all hate him. Even I can't help but feel coldness in my heart. Furthermore, there are some questions about his identity. I think there is a strong chance that he's actually Bai Xiaochun. His heart truly knows no bounds when it comes to evil. Clearly, this bearded Heavenly Duke had truly been frightened by Bai Xiaochun's plan. There are going to be a lot of people who support this new arrangement. The bastard sons and auxiliary bloodline cultivators are going to go wild with joy. The worst off of all will be the arrogant heirs apparent, and the chosen who already have a problem with him. He's basically killing them by proxy. The Grand Heaven Master smiled, and a profound gleam appeared in his eyes. This isn't a matter of him getting someone else to do his dirty work for him. He's going crazy trying to find his soul slave. Soul slave? The bearded Heavenly Duke said in surprise. Someone just captured that soul slave of his. Whoever it was knew how to do it in just the right way so that I wouldn't notice in time. Furthermore, no evidence was left behind. The bearded Heavenly Duke was clearly stunned. Go look into who did it. The Grand Heaven Master knew that whoever had done the deed had planned on him not interfering. And the truth was that, before Bai Xiaochun revealed his plan, he wouldn't have. But now he was hesitating. The bearded Duke hesitated for only a short moment. I suspect that only those four would be able to do something like this. Your humble servant will look into it immediately. He paused, then added, however, I still think Bai Hao is a ruthless schemer who must not be left alive. You're only looking at things on the surface, the Grand Heaven Master said with a profoundly intelligent smile. The giant Ghost King only has a single daughter, and therefore, Bai Hao's plan won't affect him. The fact that his plan protects the giant Ghost King shows that he knows how to be grateful. If he was the completely ungrateful type, I wouldn't dare to use him. However, considering that he is, I think I'll bless him just the same as the giant Ghost King has. If he follows the giant Ghost King, his prospects will be limited. But if he follows me, he will have no such limitations. He is definitely a ruthless dagger, but the important thing is that I hold him in my hand. The giant Ghost King doesn't qualify, only I do. The giant Ghost King tried to get him together with Zhou Zimo, right? Well, he likes Chen Manyao, so if he manages this upcoming affair properly, then I'll give him her hand. Afterward, he can become my stepson. Although the Grand Heaven Master did not speak in a loud voice, there was something profoundly meaningful to his words. In response, the bearded Heavenly Duke simply voiced his assent and left. Meanwhile, Bai Xiaochun had appeared outside of the imperial palace, a very grim look on his face, his eyes shining with cold light, and his murderous aura seething. He looked like he had gone mad, and was now so tightly wound that he seemed ready to snap and kill someone at a moment's notice. He sent out a thought, which caused his army of corpse troopers to fly over, along with Zhou Yixing, who was feeling very apprehensive. It was without a single word that he followed Bai Xiaochun all the way back to the inspections manor. He reached the place with blinding speed, and instead of descending and landing inside, he hovered in the air above it and pulled out his command medallion. After sending some divine sense into it, an image of the area below the manor appeared in his mind. He saw more than 90,000 coffins, all of them visible in complete detail, and surrounded by a sinister and cold aura. Without the slightest hesitation, he sent his divine sense sweeping over them, selecting 2,000 and saying to them, "Awaken, Rumble." The intense sounds which erupted out from the manor caused the ground to shake and the sky to flash with bright colors. Virtually all of the soul cultivators in the area could feel what was happening. Something is happening at the inspections manor again. What is that black cloud? Heavens! I can't believe that so many coffins are visible. How is this even possible? Isn't everybody talking about how Bai Hao is in big trouble? Amidst the resulting commotion, quite a few people flew up into the air and saw what looked like a black cloud above the inspections manor, radiating a shocking murderous aura. Even as everything in the area shook, the coffins began to swirl about through the air. There were 2,000 of them, a shocking sight, and yet things weren't over yet. At this point, the coffins began to open up, and numerous black-armored corpse troopers emerged from within them. Especially noteworthy was the fact that 5 of the coffins were unique. All of them had ornate designs on them, and as for the last of that group, it was a different color, silver. From within the first 4 of those coffins emerged hulking, black-armored corpse troopers who had half-diva cultivation bases. Most shocking, though, was the figure which emerged from the silver coffin, a middle-aged soul cultivator, with silver armor. Just like all the other corpse troopers, his face was completely expressionless, and he was surrounded by a shockingly cold air. However, as soon as he opened his eyes, thunder crackled in the air above, and the fluctuations of a diva erupted out from him. At the same time, the command medallion in Bai Xiaochun's hand vibrated a few times. There was something completely obstinate and unyielding about this silver-armored warrior that the command medallion instantly identified and connected with. As the diva fluctuations erupted out, the burly man's murderous aura erupted out, and it was so strong that it immediately caused the other roughly 5,000 corpse troopers to tremble, as if they were matchlessly weak. As for the 9 half-diva corpse troopers, they were also trembling. The only one who didn't was that one corpse trooper who always accompanied Bai Xiaochun. As he looked up, his eyes shone with a strange light, and he also erupted with the shocking fluctuations of a diva. Clearly, he and the silver-armored corpse trooper were equally matched. Everyone who saw that gasped and was completely taken aback. Heavens! He has 2 diva corpse troopers, 9 half-devas, and an army 5,000 strong. Damn it! Whoever was just saying that Bai Hao is in trouble was obviously just trying to start rumors. He's not in any trouble. He's gotten more powerful than ever. He's already at the same level as the previous inspections commissioner, He Ming. 5,000 corpse troopers, that's the same level of power as the 4 heavenly kings and the Grand Heaven Master. Bai Hao is the number 1 figure under the demigod realm. Shocked, people began to take out jade slips to spread the news. Meanwhile, Bai Xiaochun hovered in the air above the inspections manor, looking at the 2 most powerful corpse troopers facing off. Clearly, the silver-armored corpse trooper didn't want to be controlled. Under normal circumstances, Bai Xiaochun might have been inclined to talk things over, and maybe figure out another way to get the silver-armored corpse trooper to submit. But right now, he was in a very bad mood, and was in the grips of madness. The silver-armored corpse trooper's obstinacy only served to get on Bai Xiaochun's nerves. Eyes growing colder, he reached out and pointed at the corpse trooper. Instantly, his quasi-diva realm corpse trooper burst into action, as did his 9 half-diva troopers, murderous auras raging as they attacked the silver-armored corpse trooper. Of course, that wasn't enough. The rest of the 5,000-man strong army all howled as they attacked along with the others. Rumbling booms immediately filled the air. At the moment, it didn't matter that the silver-armored corpse trooper was a diva, he could only last for the time it takes an incense stick to burn, whereupon he slammed down into the ground. At first, he still seemed defiant, but the most powerful of the black-armored corpse troopers bashed him with another divine ability, whereupon he shivered and finally showed compliance. With that, Bai Xiaochun flicked his sleeve and paid no more heed to the matters of the corpse troopers. Flickering into motion, he headed into his secluded meditation chamber, where he sat down cross-legged and closed his eyes. He was waiting for the official announcement of the proclamation of universal grace. From what he could guess, it wouldn't be much more than a few hours before that happened. The proclamation of universal grace would definitely shake the entire city and quickly shock all of the nobility and aristocracy in the wildlands. Furthermore, the news that he had 2,000 additional corpse troopers had been witnessed by many people in the area of the inspections manor, and as they began to spread the news, all of the aristocracy in the city heard. Wait a second, what happened? How could this have happened? I thought he was in trouble and couldn't defend himself. As it turns out, he's as aggressive as ever. Something fishy is going on. Why do I suddenly have a very, very bad feeling? Something big is about to happen. The appearance of a whole new group of corpse troopers in the inspections manor was a source of complete shock to many people, especially the nobility and aristocracy, among whom numerous speculations began to run wild. This doesn't make sense. Bai Hao is supposed to be stuck in an inescapable quagmire. The only option he had was to resign as the inspections commissioner. But now, he's not only fine, he's actually stronger than before. Everyone in Arch-Emperor City was completely shaken, and the nobility and aristocracy immediately poured all the resources they could into investigating what was happening. That was especially true of the leaders of the various clans who had banded together to capture Bai Hao. Although they felt like something was off about the situation, they could find no explanation. Furthermore, they didn't dare to make too much of a scene, and could thus only wait, stewing in their speculations until the truth came to light. The chosen who had been in conflict with Bai Xiaochun were all grinding their teeth furiously that he had unexpectedly extricated himself from a deadly situation, and even come out stronger than before. How come he's not dead? It must be a bluff. Virtually all of those chosen soul cultivators were from the direct bloodlines of various important clans, and many of them were the successors selected by the older members of the clan. They were the very ones who had access to vast amounts of cultivation resources, and had thus reached their current level of cultivation. There were many bastards and other siblings and relatives who were eclipsed by their glory, people who were vastly separated from them both in terms of cultivation base and the resources they had access to. Of course, such people were still members of great clans, and thus surpassed ordinary soul cultivators in most aspects. But in terms of cultivation resources, their only hope to truly benefit was to make sure they stuck closely to the chosen successors in the clans. This had been the state of affairs in the aristocracy of the wildlands for many generations. Although occasional situations arose in which people rebelled against their clan's arrangements, they usually suffered miserable fates. When Zhao Dongshan heard the news about Bai Hao, he was in a courtyard in his clan. He was so angry that he lashed out at a nearby tree, which shattered into countless fragments that peppered other nearby members of the clan. However, none of them dared to dodge to the side, and merely stood there quietly. Many of the people present were siblings of Zhao Dongshan, many of them bastards. Outside the clan, they could act in grand and domineering fashion, but inside the clan, they had to bow their heads and act fawningly to the successor, Zhao Dongshan. At the moment, Zhao Dongshan's face was extremely grim, and his eyes burned with unyielding light. Bai Hao, he growled through gritted teeth. He feared Bai Hao, but even more so, was jealous of him. Bai Hao had trampled him underfoot from the necromancer kettle all the way to Arch-Emperor City. Furthermore, it had only been a few months since Bai Hao had forced him to offer formal greetings the way a junior would to a senior. His anger still burned hot because of that incident. However, he could only suppress his killing intent in his heart, at least until Bai Hao was thoroughly and utterly defeated. After all, he couldn't ever forget the fate of Li Tiansheng. I refuse to believe that he'll remain in power forever. Angrily flicking his sleeve, he looked around at those siblings of his who had been born out of formal wedlock. He was a fundamentally irritable person, and because he was the appointed successor in the clan, he often acted in overbearing fashion toward the other clan members. All of you line up. I want to do some sparring. He immediately headed toward one of the younger members of the clan, who was a sibling of his. The young man's expression flickered, but he didn't dare to refuse to fight. However, almost as soon as he made a move, it was obvious that he wasn't a match for Zhao Dongshan. A boom rang out, and the young man tumbled backward, blood spraying out of his mouth. The other clan members' expressions flickered, and their scalps tingled in fear. However, they had no choice in the matter. One by one, more booms and crashes could be heard as dozens of Zhao clan cultivators were flung this way and that, coughing up blood. Useless trash, all of you. Zhao Dongshan shouted. Although his words angered all of the other clan members, they knew that he was venting his frustration, and that they had no option of resisting. They simply had to endure. Zhao Dongshan was aware that they were only enduring because they had no other choice, and yet, he didn't care. He was the clan's successor, its future heavenly marquis. No matter how angry the other clan members got, they had to simply bow their heads, lest they be accused of rebellion. Zhao Dongshan snorted coldly and prepared to vent a bit more frustration when, all of a sudden, a bright beam of light shot toward them from some distance away. It was none other than an old servant, who had an expression of alarm on his face, and was panting furiously, as though he had just experienced some terrifying ordeal. He was actually preparing to fly right over Zhao Dongshan and head directly to the heavenly marquee pagoda. However, Zhao Dongshan frowned and shouted, "What's got you in such a hurry, Sun Fu? Some disaster or something?" The old man apparently didn't hear him, which led to no small amount of irritation on Zhao Dongshan's part. In fact, he waved his hand, causing a rumbling sound to fill the air as the old man was knocked out of the air. Blood oozed out of the corners of his mouth as he looked around, surprised. That was when he noticed Zhao Dongshan looking at him with a grim expression. "Something big has happened, Crown Prince," the old man said in a shaky voice. "Everybody outside is talking about it. The Grand Heaven Master is about to issue a dharmic decree, something called a proclamation of universal grace. At its core, it will force all the clans to distribute their resources evenly among all the potential heirs in the clan. It doesn't matter if you're a bastard or a non-successor, as long as you have the right blood in you, you'll be treated equally." Zhao Dongshan felt completely and utterly thunderstruck. It seemed too incredulous to believe, so much so that he stepped forward and grabbed the old man. "What did you just say?" "I'm not making it up," the old man said, shivering. "Everybody outside is talking about it." Zhao Dongshan was just about to start yelling again when, all of a sudden, the sound of bells could be heard from the imperial palace, ringing out to fill all of Arch-Emperor City. Whenever those bells tolled, it meant something extremely important was happening. As the bells tolled, a somber voice could be heard speaking, reaching the ears of everyone in the city. The founder of the Arch-Emperor dynasty once said that all living things should be treated equally. From this day forward, from the imperial court on down, the children of the clans, whether they be bastards or non-successors, will have equal access to the wealth and resources of their clans. A new golden age is about to begin for our imperial dynasty. Everyone who heard the words felt as though their hearts were leaping in their chests. Zhao Dongshan was gasping for breath, his eyes shining with disbelief as he stood there trembling, his mind a blank. All of a sudden, he looked around at all of his siblings. Before, they had averted their gazes, but now, they looked back at him with blazing eyes. Zhao Dongshan recognized that fire. It was ambition. "Impossible. This is completely impossible," he said, shivering. Meanwhile, all of the other clans in Arch-Emperor City had descended into deathly silence. As for the heavenly marquises, their expressions flickered, and their minds felt like they were about to explode. This proclamation of universal grace is going to be the end of the dynasty. This is absurd. What does the Grand Heaven Master think he's doing? Damn it, whose idea was this? Why does this proclamation of universal grace seem like just as vicious a plan as what happened on the day of ancestral sacrifices? The immediate response to the proclamation of universal grace was for Arch-Emperor City to go completely silent. But then, a huge commotion ensued. That was when the crushing demigod might of the Grand Heaven Master descended from the imperial palace. At the same time, the auras of 5 heavenly dukes joined the Grand Heaven Masters to fill the city. That was when Bai Xiaochun opened his eyes within his secluded meditation chamber in the inspections manor. Slowly rising to his feet, he took a step forward to appear in midair above the manor, his bloodshot eyes shining with cold light. Swishing his sleeve, he loudly said, "Corpse troopers, assemble immediately. The time has come to enforce the proclamation of universal grace." As his voice rang out, all of his 5,000 corpse troopers flew over, murderous auras burning with intense power. "We'll start with the heavenly marquee clans." With that, he flew up into the air, followed by the corpse troopers. His first destination, the Zhao clan. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.